I have always held a deep belief in God. Ever since I was old enough to understand the ways of the world, my mother had impressed upon me that faith was the foundation of all things. Without God, we are nothing, she'd often say. Miho. Remember that. I clung to those words as I grew older. By my teenage years, it became unmistakably clear that my life was destined for His service. Becoming a priest wasn't simply a choice. It was a calling. At least, that's what I told myself. I devoted years to the seminary, immersing myself in scriptures, theology, and the doctrines of the church. I memorized prayers, performed rituals, and learned what it truly meant to shepherd God's people. When the day of my ordination finally arrived, everything seemed to fall into place. I discovered my purpose, my mission. For many years thereafter, I served in a small Mexican town where faith was intricately woven into the fabric of everyday life. The community placed their faith in me. They turned to me for advice, direction, and solace. When life's challenges grew overwhelming, I baptized their infants, solemnized their marriages, and sanctified their homes. Outwardly, I was the very image of a priest. Yet inside, a constant disquiet gnawed at my soul, one I carefully concealed. How could I ever reveal such uncertainties? A priest is expected to be a steadfast pillar of faith. But in those quiet moments, when the church was empty and the flickering candles cast dancing shadows upon the ancient stone walls, the nagging doubt would resurface. I prayed diligently every day, led Mass with heartfelt commitment, and honored every tradition handed down through the centuries. Still, there were moments when I wondered if I truly grasped God's essence or was merely performing a ritual. Was I genuinely guiding people closer to Him, or was I merely upholding a fading institution? I tried to brush these questions aside, dismissing them as transient lapses of faith. Yet they never fully left me. Then, one evening, everything shifted. It started like any other night. The town had fallen silent. Most had returned to their families. After completing my final prayers, I remained alone in the church, seated before the altar. The only sounds were the distant chirps of crickets and the gentle whisper of wind seeping through the worn wooden doors. I found myself staring at the large crucifix above the altar, fixated on the sorrowful visage of Jesus on the cross. What am I missing? I pondered. Why do I feel so far from you? I closed my eyes and offered a soft, pleading prayer, seeking guidance, clarity, anything to fill the void within me. And then it began. At first, it was a subtle pressure in my chest, barely perceptible yet undeniably present. I shifted in my seat, suspecting I might have been lingering too long. But soon, that pressure intensified, spreading like flames through my ribs. I gasped and clutched my chest. The pain raced down my arm, and suddenly every ounce of strength seemed to drain from my body. My vision blurred, with the candlelight stretching into surreal, distorted streaks. I attempted to rise from the pew, but my legs betrayed me. My breathing turned shallow, and my head spun as the world tilted uncontrollably. The thunderous pounding of my heart overwhelmed all other sounds. I was dying. The realization struck me like a heavy blow. My body was shutting down right there, in the very sanctuary I had dedicated my life to. Utterly alone, with no one to call out to. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the altar, as if that touch could somehow anchor me and keep me present. But my strength ebbed away all too swiftly. My knees gave out, and I crumpled onto the cold, hard tile. My head struck the unforgiving surface, though I scarcely registered the blow. All I felt was the overwhelming pressure in my chest and the fiery burn in my lungs as I fought for each breath. I longed to speak, to murmur a final prayer or scream out a desperate plea for help. But no words emerged. The periphery of my vision dimmed, and my thoughts slowed to a faint echo of what they once were. Then, everything fell silent. No pain, no sound. Just an all-encompassing void. I lost all sense of time while drifting in that emptiness. It could have been seconds, minutes, or even hours. Time itself seemed to vanish in that void. Then gradually, something shifted. A strange sensation washed over me as if I were being lifted. Not in any physical sense, but in a way I had never experienced before. I became aware of the room once more, though not as I had known it. It was as though I were observing it from an entirely different angle. And then I saw myself, lying motionless on the floor, my own body lifeless beneath me. I was no longer contained within it. In that moment, I realized I was dead. The moment everything turned black. I had assumed that would be the end. My mind lay empty and my body numb, as if all the weight, the pain, and the tumult of life had vanished in an instant. Yet, what followed was beyond anything I could have foreseen. At first, I sensed a delicate feeling, like being suspended underwater, weightless and detached. Slowly, the darkness around me began to shift, yielding to something entirely new. I no longer possessed a body, at least not in the way I had always understood it. Yet, I could feel myself moving, ascending. The sensation was peculiar, as if an unseen force were drawing me upward. I did not resist. I wasn't even sure I could. And then I saw myself again. There I was, lying on the cold tile floor of the church, completely still. My body appeared small and fragile, like a discarded shell. My arms lay limply at my sides, and the soft glow of candlelight danced across my pale face. I even noticed a small smear of blood on the ground where my head had struck the floor. It was surreal, seeing myself from that distance. Yet I felt no fear. I should have been panicking, shouldn't I? But instead, an odd calm washed over me as if the chaos of the world had been left far behind. I hovered there, watching the scene below, unable to move closer or retreat further. Even the church around me seemed transformed. It wasn't merely a shift in perspective. It was as though the very essence of the place had changed. The warm, familiar sanctuary, where I had prayed, preached, and served for so many years, now felt utterly alien. And then I noticed it. A shadow. It lurked just beyond the reach of the flickering candlelight dancing between the pews. At first, I dismissed it as a mere trick of the light, but soon I realized it was drawing nearer. And it wasn't alone. More shadows began to materialize, emerging from the darkness like tendrils of smoke. They moved in an uncanny, unnatural manner, their forms twisting and swirling as they advanced. I couldn't make out any distinct faces or features, only ever-changing silhouettes, but their presence was undeniable. The air thickened and chilled, laden with a weight that pressed upon me, despite my lack of a tangible form. The peace I'd known moments before evaporated, replaced by a mounting dread. The shadows did not speak in words, yet I perceived them, a series of soft, eerie whispers, reminiscent of a distant wind carrying secret messages. Though I could not decipher their meaning, the tone alone sent a shiver down my spine. They were drawing me in, not through any physical grasp, but by an unseen force. It was as if invisible hands were tugging at the very core of my being, pulling me away from the altar's light and into the encroaching darkness. I resisted, struggling as one might against a relentless current. The more fiercely I fought, the stronger the pull became. Panic surged within me as I realized I could not stop their advance. Was this my destiny? Was this the end of my journey? I recalled every sermon I had delivered, every caution I had voiced about the perils of spiritual warfare, yet I had never truly understood it, until now. The shadows were more than a mere absence of light. They were alive, and they desired me. My mind screamed in silent desperation, but I was mute. Without a voice or a physical form to express my terror, I could only watch as the shadows closed in, their whispers growing into a low, foreboding hum. Then, just as the darkness seemed ready to engulf me, something shifted. A light emerged. At first it appeared as a faint spark in the distance. Slowly, it intensified, cutting through the shadows like a sharp blade. The darkness recoiled, and the shadows hissed and fell back as the light expanded. The oppressive force that had dragged me away vanished in an instant, replaced by a warmth I had never before known. This light was not limited to the space around me. It filled me from within, permeating every fiber of my being, overwhelming yet gentle. Its radiance was pure and powerful, embracing me softly. I couldn't tear my gaze away. I was irresistibly drawn toward it. This time, I did not resist. As I inched closer, the murmurs of the shadows disappeared entirely, replaced by a silence that resonated like a melody. It was serene and comforting, yet charged with an expectant energy, as though something extraordinary awaited just ahead. The closer I drew, the more I sensed it. A presence within the light. This illumination was not merely light for its own sake. It was alive, teeming with love and power, calling out to me. For the first time since my body had ceased to be, I felt neither lost nor afraid. All I experienced was an irresistible pull towards something far greater than myself. In that moment, I understood that this was no accident, no fleeting dream. I was being drawn towards something divine, something destined to transform me forever. The light continued to wrap around me, bestowing a warmth and peace unlike any I had ever known. As I ventured further into its embrace, I became aware of a presence so profound and overwhelming that I instinctively knew I was nearing something beyond my comprehension. And then I saw him. At the very heart of the light stood a figure, radiant and distinct, as though he were both an integral part of the light and its very source. His features were unmistakable, yet they held depths that defied my understanding. His face radiated love and compassion, yet an undeniable power shone from him, a quiet authority that made everything else seem insignificant. I ceased all movement, if such a thing could even be called movement. I simply existed in awe. "Javier," he said. Hearing my name uttered by him was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was more than just his voice. It was a calling, an innate certainty, as if he were addressing the very depths of my soul. "Javier," he repeated, and this time I felt the profound weight of his words, devoid of judgment or anger, filled only with an undeniable truth. I found myself utterly mute. What could I possibly say? All my life, I had proclaimed the name of Jesus, preached his teachings, and implored others to follow him. And now, here I was, standing before him, completely unprepared. He moved closer, and the love radiating from him was almost overwhelming. It wasn't a love I had earned or deserved. It simply existed, vast and unconditional. "You have served me," he said, his tone both gentle and firm. "You have dedicated your life to my cause. But Javier, do you truly know me?" His question struck me like a sudden bolt of lightning. My mind raced in a desperate search for an answer. Of course I knew him, hadn't I? I had spent decades poring over scripture, leading mass, and teaching others about his life and sacrifice. Yet, standing there, face to face with Jesus, I realized something terrible. I had never truly known him. I thought I did," I managed to whisper, though my words felt weak and empty. Jesus looked at me with an expression that mingled sorrow with hope, as though he already understood my answer, but was waiting for me to discover it on my own. "You know about me," he said softly, yet incisively. "You know the stories, the rituals, the words. But have you ever truly known me? Have you ever sought the essence of my heart, or have you merely followed my commandments? The truth in his words cut through me like a sharpened blade. I had spent my life entangled in rituals, structure, and the traditions of the church, gauging my faith by how strictly I adhered to its rules and dictates. But had I ever earnestly pursued a relationship with him? Had I ever opened my heart to truly know him beyond the printed words? Tears welled in my eyes as the enormity of it all overwhelmed me. I recalled every sermon I had delivered, every piece of advice I had given, each time urging others to trust in Jesus while I remained too fearful to do the same. I don't know, I whispered, my voice trembling. I thought I was doing what you wanted. I believed I was serving you. Jesus reached out and placed his hand on my shoulder, and the warmth of his touch filled me with both comfort and conviction. You have done many good things, Javier, he said, but faith isn't defined solely by your actions. It's about who you are with me. It's about truly knowing me, loving me, and letting that love guide every part of your life. I could no longer hold back my tears. They streamed down my face as I sank to my knees before him. I'm sorry, I choked out, my voice breaking. I thought I was enough. I thought I was doing enough. But now I see that I was missing the most important thing. Jesus knelt beside me, his face nearly touching mine, his eyes filled with nothing but love. It is not too late, Javier, he said. You can know me. You can still walk with me. Not just for my sake. His words were like a lifeline, drawing me up from the depths of the despair I had sunk into. For the first time, I understood the difference between the faith I had practiced and the faith he was inviting me to embrace. It wasn't about the rituals, the structure, or even the title I bore as a priest. It was about him. Teach me, I pleaded through my tears, looking up at him. Teach me how to know you. Jesus smiled, and in that moment the light surrounding us seemed to shine all the brighter. This is only the beginning, Javier, he said, his tone both inviting and profound. But there is so much more to see. With those words, the world around us began to shift once more, and I felt myself being drawn ever deeper into his presence. The light changed before my eyes, growing richer, deeper, as if imbued with layers of meaning I could not yet grasp. There stood Jesus, his presence unyielding, and I sensed that he was on the verge of unveiling something essential, something that would alter the very fabric of my being. Javier, he continued, his voice both gentle and resolute, you have spent your life in my service. Yet there is a deeper truth you must come to understand. Before I could utter a response, the light shifted again, and suddenly I was no longer enveloped in its warmth. Instead, I found myself observing scenes from my own life as though peering through a clear window. These were more than simple recollections. They were snapshots of my ministry, moments when I believed I was truly doing God's work. But now, as I watched them through his eyes, I noticed details I had never seen before. In one vision, I saw myself blessing a family's new home. The mother clutched her baby tightly, her eyes filled with gratitude as I sprinkled holy water and prayed over them. At that moment, I had felt a swell of pride, convinced that I was inviting God's presence into their lives. Yet, as I observed, I realized I had hurried through that blessing, distracted by the next appointment on my calendar. I had not taken the time to truly listen to them, to understand their hidden fears or unspoken hopes. I had performed the ritual mechanically, without being fully present. Then the scene shifted again, and I saw myself delivering a sermon in a crowded church. I had spoken passionately about the importance of faith and obedience, confident that my words were inspiring the congregation to follow God. But as I watched, I began to notice faces in the crowd that I had overlooked before, faces etched with doubt, pain, and longing. They were not there merely for the rituals or rules. They were searching for something deeper, something genuine, and I had failed to see it. I had never met them where they truly were. Tears welled in my eyes as more scenes unfolded. Time and again, I witnessed moments where I had fixated on the outward traditions of the church, neglecting the profound inner needs of those I was meant to serve. It wasn't that the rituals were wrong in themselves. They had their rightful place. But I had allowed them to become the focal point of my ministry instead of keeping Jesus at the center. "Do you see now, Javier?" Jesus asked, his voice cutting through the heavy tide of my emotions. "Faith isn't measured by the acts you perform. It's defined by the love you embody. The rituals are meant to lead you to me, yet too often they become the destination rather than the path." I could only nod in silence, lost for words. The undeniable truth of his words struck me deeply. For so long, I had believed that being a good priest meant strictly following the rules, leading ceremonies, and upholding the traditions of the church. But now I recognized how shallow that understanding had been. Jesus went on, "The church is not merely an institution, Javier. It is my body. It is the people who seek me, who love me, and who love one another. It isn't built of stone or timber, but of hearts open to my grace." As he spoke, the visions shifted once more. This time, I saw moments when I had truly embodied his love without even realizing it. I saw myself sitting beside an elderly woman who had just lost her husband, gently holding her hand as she wept. I saw myself administering the last rites to a young man in a hospital, surrounded by a family marked by sorrow. I saw myself helping a destitute farmer repair his roof after a storm, my hands calloused by honest labor. "These are the moments when you truly knew me," Jesus said. "Not because of what you were doing, but because of the way you loved. These were the times when your heart was in perfect harmony with mine." I was overwhelmed by a mingling of awe and shame, awed by the transformative power of love to light even the darkest moments, and ashamed of how often I had allowed the structure of my role to overshadow the essence of my mission. For every genuine connection, there were countless instances when I had prioritized ritual and routine over the intimate, loving presence of Jesus. Jesus moved nearer, his eyes overflowing with compassion. "Javier, I do not condemn you. I know your heart, and I understand the burdens you've borne. But now you see the truth, and with that truth comes a choice." "A choice?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Yes," he replied. "You may continue as you have been, doing good, yet never truly knowing me. Or you can cast aside the traditions that have confined you and step fully into my love. You can lead others to me, not through mere rituals, but by living a life that reflects my grace." The gravity of his words settled upon me, and I realized there was no turning back. I couldn't unsee what he had revealed, nor unlearn this truth. For so long, I had believed my duty as a priest was to preserve the church, but now I understood it was about something far greater. Guiding people to Jesus, helping them come to know him as I was beginning to know him now. "I want to choose you," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "I want to know you deeply, to live for you." Jesus smiled, and the light around him seemed to blaze even more brilliantly. "Then follow me, Javier, and trust that I will guide you every step of the way." As he spoke, a warmth filled my chest, a profound peace and sense of purpose unlike any I had known before. The doubts, fears, and questions that had tormented me for so long began to recede. They did not disappear entirely, but they no longer controlled me. This moment marked the beginning of something new, something authentic. The light around us shifted once more, and I sensed that my journey was far from over. There was still so much to see, so much to understand. Yet for the first time in my life, I felt unafraid. I was ready. As the radiant light settled around me, I stood utterly motionless, overwhelmed by all that I had witnessed. The weight of my life, my choices, my faith, my doubts, pressed heavily upon me. And yet amid that burden, a clarity emerged. At last, I grasped what had been missing, and my heart longed to embrace this truth forever. Jesus stepped even closer, his gaze both loving and determined. I sensed that something momentous was about to unfold, a turning point that would forever change the course of my life. "Javier," he said, his voice steady yet gentle, "what you have seen here is not meant solely for you. It is for them, for all who search, for all who are lost, and for those who have placed their faith in empty things." I nodded, at a loss for words. My mind whirled with questions. How could I, someone who had spent years fixated on rituals and traditions, lead others to something more profound? How could I possibly live up to the truth you have shown me? As if reading my thoughts, Jesus continued, "You are not called to be perfect. You are called to be faithful. It is not your strength that will carry this mission. It is mine." He raised his hand, and in an instant, the light around us shifted once again. Suddenly, I was no longer in that serene, radiant space. Instead, I found myself looking upon our world from above, not at its physical landscapes or nations, but at its hearts, its lives, its souls. I saw people everywhere, absorbed in their daily routines, their faces marked by a quiet despair. Some were weighed down by poverty, others by isolation or loss. Many, though surrounded by life's comforts, harbored an inner emptiness. The details varied, yet the essence was the same, a deep longing for something more, something real. I saw churches, some brimming with people, others nearly deserted. In many, the emphasis was on rituals, recited words, sung hymns, and maintained traditions. Yet I sensed a lack of true connection. They were like hollow shells, beautiful on the outside, yet void of the substance that gives life genuine meaning. And then I saw something else. I saw fleeting moments of sincere faith, scattered like small beacons amid the darkness. A mother lifting her prayers for her child, a young man choosing forgiveness over bitterness, a stranger offering kindness to someone in need. These instances were humble and often overlooked by the world, yet they held immense power. They captured the very essence of what Jesus had been teaching me, that faith isn't about grand gestures or strict routines, but about love, humility, and authentic connection. As the vision unfolded, a deep sorrow welled within me for those ensnared in tradition, who believed that mere rule-following was sufficient, never having truly experienced the love of Jesus. At last I understood what he meant when he said, "It is not too late." These people were not beyond hope. They simply needed someone to lead them. "Do you see, Javier?" Jesus said, his voice piercing through the vision. "This is the world I came to save, and it is the world I'm calling you to serve." Tears streamed down my face as I turned back to him. "But how?" I asked, my voice shaking. "How can I reach them? How can I help them see what I have seen?" Jesus smiled, his expression a blend of gentle encouragement and firm conviction. "By living the truth you now know," he replied, "by showing them my love instead of merely speaking of it, by walking beside them, not standing aloof, and by reminding them that their worth is not defined by their deeds, but by who they are, in me." His words took root in my heart like seeds planted in fertile soil. I wasn't sure how I would carry out this mission, but I knew I could not turn away from it. The world needed this message, this truth, and I was entrusted with its delivery. Before I could utter another word, Jesus raised his hand, and the light around us intensified, enveloping us both. I felt him place his hand on my chest right over my heart. The warmth was immediate, spreading through me like a surge of energy and peace. "Javier," he said, his tone both commanding and tender, "you are not alone. I will be with you in every step, every word, and every moment. Trust me, and I will guide you." As his hand rested upon my chest, something within me shifted. It was as if a veil had been lifted, allowing me to see the world and my purpose more clearly than ever before. The doubts and fears that had once held me back still lingered, but they no longer possessed the same power. They were overwhelmed by a profound sense of love, hope, and determination. Then the light around us began to change again, and I realized what was unfolding. My time in this radiant space was drawing to a close. Soon I would have to return to my body, to my life, and to the mission Jesus had laid before me. Before the light fully faded, he spoke one final time. "Remember, Javier, it is not about what you know. It is about who you know, and I have always known you." With those words, the light dimmed, and I felt myself being gently drawn back, as if I were being lowered into the world I had left behind. The comforting peace of his presence lingered, even as the weight of my physical body returned. I didn't know what awaited me on the other side, but one thing was certain: I was no longer the man I once was. I had been entrusted with a mission, and I knew I could not fail him. The first sound I noticed upon returning was the murmur of voices. At first, they were faint and distant, as if coming from a far-off place. Gradually, they became clearer, urgent voices speaking in quick, anxious tones. My chest felt heavy, and my body was weak, yet I was alive. I opened my eyes, squinting against the harsh fluorescent light overhead. It took me a moment to realize where I was. The gentle beeping of hospital machines filled the space around me, and I could feel the steady flow of something cool coursing through the IV in my arm. A nurse leaned over me, relief softening her features as she saw me stir. "Padre," she murmured kindly, "you're awake." The word awake resonated with a weight I had never felt before. I was not just physically awake, I was spiritually alert in a way I had never known. The memories of what had just transpired, the brilliant light, my encounter with Jesus, and the mission he entrusted to me, remained as vivid as the room in which I now lay. After the nurse stepped away, a doctor entered, speaking briskly about my condition. He mentioned a heart attack, how close they had come to losing me, and that my survival was nothing short of miraculous. I nodded along, not truly absorbing his words, for my mind was elsewhere, replaying every word Jesus had spoken to me. Once the doctor departed, I was left alone with my thoughts. As I gazed up at the ceiling, the crushing weight of it all settled upon me. I had died. I had stood before Jesus. And now, I had been granted a second chance. Not merely a second chance at life, but a chance to live with true purpose. The following days passed in a blur. Friends from the parish visited, offering prayers and heartfelt support. They called me lucky, even blessed, to be alive. I smiled and expressed my gratitude, yet deep inside I knew it wasn't just luck. It was something far greater. As soon as I felt strong enough, I began sharing my experience. I recounted to my fellow priests what had occurred, what Jesus had revealed to me through the light, the visions, and the profound truth he had imparted. I had come to realize that faith isn't about titles or traditions. It's about truly knowing him. Most of my colleagues listened politely, though many dismissed it as a dream or a stress-induced near-death experience. One priest, speaking in a gentle yet patronizing tone, even cautioned, "Don't read too much into it." But I couldn't simply ignore what I had experienced. In my heart, I knew it was real. And I wasn't alone in that conviction. A few parishioners and friends listened intently, their eyes alight with wonder. "Padre," one woman said, her voice trembling, "do you think Jesus is really calling us to something different?" "Yes," I replied steadily. "He's calling us all, not to follow rituals blindly, but to truly know him, to live with love, humility, and compassion." That conversation marked the beginning of my new ministry. When I returned to the church, I realized that things could never revert to the old ways. I couldn't simply lead mass, perform rituals, and go through the motions as before. My heart had been transformed, and I knew my work had to mirror that change. I began to focus on the people, truly seeing them, listening to their struggles, and walking alongside them on their own journeys of faith. I spent more time with the sick, the poor, and the lost, offering not just prayers, but tangible expressions of Christ's love. My sermons evolved too. No longer did I preach that strict obedience to the church was the ultimate goal. Instead, I spoke about Jesus, about the relationship we could have with him, and how he longs to know us on a personal level. I encouraged everyone to seek him not merely through rituals, but with all their hearts. Some embraced this transformation, feeling closer to God than ever before, while others resisted, clinging to the traditions they had known all their lives. And that was perfectly all right. I wasn't there to force change. I was there to guide, to love, and to embody the truth Jesus had shown me. It wasn't always easy. There were days when I felt overwhelmed by skepticism and resistance, wondering if I was doing enough or failing the mission Jesus had entrusted to me. In those moments, I recalled his words, "You are not alone. I will guide you." Those words became my anchor. As the months passed, the transformation within the parish became undeniable. People who had once felt disconnected from their faith began to rediscover new meaning in their relationship with God. Families grew closer, neighbors became more compassionate, and the church evolved from being merely a building into a vibrant community. For me, a peace I had never known settled within. The doubts that had once haunted me were replaced by a quiet confidence in Christ's love. I no longer measured my worth by my role as a priest or by the perfection of my rituals. I knew now that my value was found in him, and that was more than enough. One evening, as I sat in the empty church with candles flickering softly around me, I recalled the moment I had collapsed that fateful night, the pain, the fear, the encroaching darkness. But even more, I remembered the overwhelming, radiant light of his presence. I realized that faith was never meant to be about titles or traditions. It was always about him, about knowing him, loving him, and allowing that love to transform every facet of our lives. Kneeling before the altar, I whispered a quiet prayer, not for myself, but for those I'd been called to serve. "Lord, help me show them what you have shown me. Help me lead them to you." And in that moment, I felt his presence again, as real and powerful as it had been that night. I knew then that I was exactly where I was meant to be, doing precisely what I was called to do. The journey was far from over, but I was ready for whatever lay ahead.